Welcome to American Issues Take One on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about confronting a punitive federal government. How can you protect yourself and others? Our co-host for the show is Ben Davis. Our guest for the show, our esteemed guest for the show, is Chuck Crumpton. Welcome to the show, both. Retaliatory attacks create fear among our citizens, undermine our institutions and our democracy, and would allow would-be dictators to enhance their power. We need to identify and follow attacks like this and take the steps necessary to oppose them for the protection of the victims involved and for the protection of the country. So I guess the question is, he is retaliating. I guess I would put this question to you, Ben. Why? Why is he retaliating? How does it serve his interest?
It's a great question. I mean, the why of it is seems to be that he bought the 2025 project, and the essence of the 2025 project is the long-term Republican view of basically destroying the federal government. You know, draining what it was called starving the beast. So on the one hand, you're going to just now not slash and burn the programs, and on the other hand, you're going to give a big tax cut to the rich, and that's about it. Just he is like the worst manifestation of that long-term Republican anti-federal government vision. That's the and that's why he was raised that way. He was raised way that was the way things are supposed to be done. Or he adopted that because it gets him power, and and gets present. He gets people to see him, and he gets notoriety as being the greatest, right? I mean, his whole thing is like he says he's greater than George Washington, right? I mean, the ego feed is huge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Michael Wolff, talks in his books about exactly how this theory comes about. His central theory about Trump is that Trump wants attention, and everything he does is to get attention, and he's been very successful in getting attention. It's basically something that Trump has always played, and he's getting better at it. And the metric is how many articles appear in the newspaper with his name.
I think it definitely has some legs. Even though the levels that it seems to be, the way it's manifesting in the terms of the levels of effort to look like madness. I mean, really look like madness. But I think that Wolf has a very good point about how he has consistently been. This need to be seen, need to be recognized. Well, no matter what, he's the center of attention. It's like the kid at the family Thanksgiving who is allowed to act up so that everybody sees that kid. He's just you feel that kind of thing coming off. It's kind of bizarre from a over 70-year-old man, quite honestly.
When I prepare the daily advisory for ThinkTech, I look for news stories of interest or concern, and I find that most of the stories of interest or concern reported in the newspapers are about Trump, directly or indirectly. So, and I think Michael Wolff has a point in the sense that if you look for the number of articles that begin with the word Trump, you have to give Trump some credit for establishing himself as the most famous person in the world. And that is actually a conversation to that effect with Jared. What do you think of me, Jared? Jared's answer is, you're famous, and
Right.
You're the most famous person in the world. Okay.
It's not necessarily a good thing for him. Okay. I mean, let me put it in a stark way to you. I do believe that there was a point in time where every newspaper in the world probably had Hitler on the front. Okay. And he was, everybody was like, what? Or Stalin, or maybe not Mao as much. Right. So, yeah. But that is like seriously mad, sick people. Okay. I mean, doing horrific things. So, any satisfaction that he would have from being on 6 or 8 or 10 articles, we have to also kind of measure it in terms of the sickness it demonstrates, I think, or the complete sort of lack of any kind of sort of inherent personal guardrails as to what is sort of acceptable civilized behavior. That's what I'm going to say. I mean, let me give you one quick example, if you'll permit me to say this, Chuck, is that there's this effort right now, apparently, at the Social Security Administration to shut down offices. Okay, so you want to save some money. Maybe there are some redundant offices and things like that. Then at the same time, there's going to be an effort to require people to show up at Social Security offices to prove whatever they want to prove so that they can continue to have or get their benefits. Now, I've been to assisted care living places. I've seen 80-year-old people. I've seen 90-year-old people, some of them very alone, right? How is it even possible to imagine that people, I've seen also 60, 70, younger people with disabilities are getting disability, right? How is it possible to imagine that any of those people would be capable of going to a Social Security office to plead their case? Let's talk to somebody with Alzheimer's, okay? I mean, for them to get their benefits continued. How in any vision of the world is that conceivable, right? And yet, this is looked at as a great idea, and it gets you press. I know, again, whoa, everybody's talking about a Social Security plan and all that. Yes, but it is really, really sick. I mean, it's really a level of darkness that is kind of absolutely shocking. I mean, no matter whether you are the most right-wing person in the world, I just think it's completely shocking that somebody would put old people through that, and people with disabilities with it. I mean, you have to have that kind of useless eaters Nazi vision to even contemplate acting like that. At least to me.
It's very provocative. And the provocative part puts it up, on the top of the newspaper. And people will, be aggravated by it. They will be provoked by it. And of course, the rationale is that this will skinny down the number of people who can apply, because those people, as you mentioned, would have trouble applying in person. And so you spend less money. It's a way to cut back on Social Security. Chuck, let me go to you about all of this. One other thing that Michael Wolff said is that when you have somebody who is interested in getting attention, you don't have policy. And one of his theories is that there is no policy. The policy is dictated by getting attention, by provoking people. The other thing that Michael Wolff said is that, and Ben touched on this, is that this approach for a president is really not sustainable. It will wither. It can't be popular on a sustainable basis. Your thoughts?
So we're seeing a lot of things going on, and the points made and the Wolff principles are worth understanding and appreciating. But basically, you've got a guy who's a narcissistic bully whose only claim to fame really was a reality TV show, which was probably as unrealistic in the corporate world, the business world, as you'll ever get. You can't do that stuff that he did and got away with on there. But he's doing it, he's getting away with that. And so the other question that you raised at the beginning, which is really the critical one, how do we get through this in a way that enables the force to shift and turn it around? And I think that's what underlies your question. That's what I would put back to the two of you. Where do you see that coming from?
Well, before we go to that, Chuck, I do have a scope question I want to ask you. What are we talking about with this retaliation, these attacks? Right now, we look at the newspaper, we see lawsuits, against the media. We hear about audits of individual commentators and broadcasters. We see investigations by the Department of Justice, which is very, very different than it ever was before. We see prosecutions, or at least threats of prosecution, by the Department of Justice, and actions by the FBI. All of this seems to be dedicated to retaliation and attacks against those who don't agree with Trump, or who he perceives as his enemies. Most recently, you see law firms who represent people. I mean, this is really sort of another degree. It's a second degree kind of thing. Perkins Coie is an example, but there's another one in Wall Street, I think, where he's depriving them of government, or trying to deprive them of government contracts because they represent somebody, like, for example, Jack Smith, who he perceives as his enemy. And of course, the whole deportation thing. But, what's the scope that we're talking about here today? We're talking about attacks. We're talking about a punitive administration. What's the depth and breadth of that punitive aspect?
I think the most honest response to that question is where do you see any limits at all? He will attack and ignore the courts. The Supreme Court Chief Justice comes out and says, that's not right. So what? Right? He completely ignores and violates the rule of law, the Constitution. Where are there any limits? I mean, where is that scope limited at this point? If he's opposed to it, he and his legion of minions will go after it, whether it's J.D. Vance trying to tear down Zelensky in a meeting in the Oval Office or at the White House, or whether he's going after students or the university at Columbia, or whether he's going, I mean, there literally is no limit to the people that he's going to consider his enemies, because he is a narcissist. Everyone is a potential enemy unless they do exactly what he wants, the way he wants it done, with the result he wants.
We didn't mention DEI. Ben, do you put DEI in this category too? Is that also an expression of Trump's hostility, his hatred, his desire to fight with the country? Not only to reduce the size of government, but to fight with the country, and for that matter, the world. Where does DEI fit in all of that?
To speak to DEI, I would start out first by just saying, you asked for the breadth and the depth, right? Right. So for the breadth, I would say it is worldwide. Okay. And then for the depth, I'd say it's particularly deep in the United States, and then more or less deep around the world. I mean, so that's what his marketplace, if I could say, or his vision of where he is operating. Okay. And what is he trying to do? On DEI is just one lever that is popular with people who vote for him. Anti-DEI, pro-merit, right? And I heard Sherilyn Ifill speaking about the whole DEI thing. Is that, what does it do? Is it saying that basically if you run into any woman or any minority or any transgender person who excels, the conclusion you must come to is that they didn't earn it. That is the message that he is sending to essentially all, particularly white men out there, but also trying to have us internalize it, right? And so there's another angle to this, though, which is, let's take a look at the idea of erasing women, minorities in the Pentagon, on the web pages of the Pentagon. What's a DEI program in that. This is Sherilyn Ifill pointed this out. It's got nothing to do with promoting DEI or anything like that. It is just, we are going to erase all the women who were at Arlington National Cemetery. We're going to erase Colin Powell. We're going to erase the Tuskegee Airmen. Why? Because they're Black. Or we're going to erase the the code talkers. None of that's got to do anything with DEI. It's got to do with erasing people. We're going to get rid of the transgender people. Why? What's the DEI aspect of that, right? And so it is like a kind of boorish, really retrograde 19th century vision of the world that is attractive to people, because the message that is being sent is that it's only when white men compete that there is merit, which is actually kind of the opposite of what is reality, which is that it's only merit when everybody competes, really. You go to the Olympics, it's kind of the one who wins is kind of the one who wins, you know what I mean? But it's been for so long that vision of the centrality of control being that by white men in America, that he's just playing into that. That's all he's doing. And there are enough people, and I'm going to say also, both people who are white and people who are minorities and people who are women and all that, who are willing to go along with that or even believe it because they think they can get an advantage of it. Go along to get along.
I'm thinking of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, one of the most significant missions of the Coast Guard is dealing with the environment, climate change, oil spills, and the like. I mean, it's just one example. And in their manuals, their teaching manuals at the Coast Guard Academy, they refer to climate change.
Yeah.
Well, P.S., that's been removed from all their manuals. Somebody sat there and went through all the materials, the teaching materials at the Coast Guard Academy, and deleted the words climate change, even though climate change is central to the mission of the organization and will continue to be, directly and indirectly.
Right.
So you really wonder what is going on here. And there's all kinds of other examples. The 442nd, they didn't have to take the 442nd out. They didn't have to take the code talkers out. And this is happening. I don't know how many people must be involved in scouring through websites and teaching materials to do this, but it is certainly not a valuable use of their time, may I say.
You do a global search of climate change, and every time it shows, you got your keywords that you want to eliminate, right? It's really, but the thing is that if I do this, I get $1 billion from the fossil fuel industry, and I'm richer, and then I get higher up on the Forbes list, and there, what I mean, and I get, more notoriety because it doesn't care. You understand? He's one of these amazingly lacking in empathy people. I mean, really just like stark towards pretty much anything. I'm even going to go past this family, it's just a person without empathy. And it's basically about money. His whole life has been about how to make a buck and where he can make a buck. I mean, and he doesn't really care if he screws anybody, right? You look at that, what are those meme coins he's done and all that, which is essentially ripping off people who buy it, right? It's a pump. What is it? A pump and dump.
Now, Chuck, let me go to you. Is this legal? Is what we are talking about this punitive, retaliatory characteristic of the Trump administration? Is it legal?
Not even close. But that's part of the point about your scope question is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller has set forth the principle you can do anything to anyone if nobody stops you. That's what's going on. Whether it's legal, whether it complies with the rule of law, whether it comports with what a lifetime federal judge or appellate panel has ruled, or even the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled. Well, all of that is by the wayside. That's not within the scope of the guardrails anymore.
Well, let me take it a step further. there still is the First Amendment. I hadn't heard that it had been repealed. It's still out there, freedom of speech. And yet, if you say some things that bother him, he is going to retaliate. He is going to try to punish you. He's going to try to stop you. And that should be central in our discussion, because a lot of what he is doing in terms of this punitive characteristic of his actions should be barred by the First Amendment. The First Amendment seems to have suffered even in the past few weeks. Your thoughts about the First Amendment and how it can be enforced, and is it being enforced? And is it necessary for Congress to say, I love this, is it necessary for Congress to say, look, the founders and the country adopted the First Amendment. They really meant that. We mean it, we mean it, we mean it. How about listening? What does it take to make the First Amendment stronger, more respected by this administration?
But it still goes back to the same question, right? If you've got a billionaire and a wannabe billionaire in control, and they've got a legion of minions who are going to do exactly what they say and parrot their words, whether it's true or not, whether it complies with the rule of law or not, whether it benefits society or any portion of it other than the few billionaires, those guardrails are gone. Who's going to put them back? Is it going to be the courts? Is it going to be movements like in the 60s and 70s? Where is it going to come from?
So, Ben, is the court system working on this? I mean, we have the most recent news is that Trump blows off a court decision he doesn't like, and visibly, openly, hostile, notorious. He blows it off, even assuming that he didn't do that, even assuming he didn't get away with that. Is the court system adequate? We know that Congress is not adequate. Maybe at the midterms, if we have midterms, Congress would be better disposed to deal with this. Right now, it doesn't deal with it at all. The courts deal with it, but the courts are slow. They're irregular, if you will. Some judges don't say the same things that other judges say. Then when it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll be some delay, and you don't know the result, and this leaves the country in uncertainty on whether these punitive actions will be taken. And of course, this creates fear. Are the courts sufficiently equipped to deal with this so as to allay that fear? The courts are our only hope here. Are they able?
I have a view that is kind of both yes and no. I'm sorry to be sort of like that, because I think one of the things that the courts do is that under oath they find facts. So to the extent that there's stuff going out in the newspapers and all that, it's like irrelevant. In the courtroom, you're under penalty of perjury. Things have to be done and said, and that has a somewhat chastening effect that is fascinating to watch somebody who's representing the government try to navigate how far they can go when the government is saying we're going to ignore what courts say, and then they have to sit in front of a judge and say, no, we're going to comply with what you say. The judges are putting the lawyers who are representing this particular government through their paces. All right. And so in that sense, you get these wonderful moments where people have been saying various things, for example, about Elon Musk. Is he running Doge? No, he's not running Doge. He's just an advisor to the president, right? So finally, a judge says yesterday, as after 68 pages, I don't believe all that stuff. It's clear he's running. He should have been appointed and subject to Senate confirmation. And so therefore, what he did to USAID is unconstitutional. All right. I mean, that kind of a decision, you might think it's not much, but I think that is a very significant thing, is that you can blow lots of smoke, but at some point a judge will write something that will be a decision. So that's the yes side. The no side is, I think our jurisprudence as a whole has had in the background, particularly with relating to the federal government, an implicit thinking in its deference that the federal government is acting in good faith. And so the jurisprudence kind of has that built into it. And what the courts are coping with is a federal government that is not acting in good faith. How does it deal with a federal government that because you have it, look, I'm going to say it this way, you have a huge number of executive orders, right, that seem to be doing all these things. But if you look at them very closely, they don't track with the actual law, right? They're just policy statements that the president wants to make, which are completely inconsistent with law, with the take care to faithfully execute the law part of this, that is in the oath. So it's betraying the oath, right? Well, the courts have to deal with that. And they're not used to saying, Mr. President, at this level, you're wrong. They've said it once in a while for every president for different things, but they're not used to it. Now, let me just speak to lawlessness, for example. This whole deporting people to El Salvador, right? This is nothing new, okay, in terms of the game playing that happened, that I just want to highlight, because I got so kind of ticked off today that I actually wrote a letter to my good friend at Doge saying, hey, Justin, watch out, man, because let me tell you, man, this is crazy. So the idea is that the argument that's been made is that the judge's order does not apply in international airspace. Okay? I mean, that's the kind of thing that and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, in case you ever been on a plane, have you ever heard the stewardess say something like, do not tamper with the smoke detector, and you are required to follow crew instructions under what? Federal law. On any plane you've ever been on. Why? Because planes, just like in the old days with boats, have flags. And the flag of an American plane means that American law applies on that plane. You understand? It's really, really that basic. So to say, well, it's an international airspace is like insane.
Well, it's like the auto pen issue.
Right.
That none of Joe Biden's proclamations and executive orders were valid because he had an auto pen sign them. Let me move to Chuck for a minute.
Yeah.
Chuck, make yourself the victim here, okay? The victim of punitive action taken by this Trump administration, one way or the other. And okay, you have to go to court, or the court comes to you in a lawsuit or a prosecution, what have you. And there you are, and you have to defend yourself against the United States Department of Justice, which has legions of lawyers with bottomless pit of resources, and furthermore, mostly acolytes now, because the ones who might not agree with what they're doing have been separated somehow. So the question is, as a victim here, either as somebody who has to go to court, or the court comes after you for some reason, or tries to indict you and the like through the Department of Justice, FBI, that's going to cost you plenty of money, Chuck. And people have made that clear, that it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. You may be absolutely right. And your answer to my earlier question, is what they're doing legal? No, they're not. They're not legal. It's a violation of law. It's an open violation of the Constitution. And yet, there you are in court. And you have to have somebody standing alongside. I mean, maybe you, Chuck, you would be able to handle the whole Department of Justice when they write some crazy briefs and motions against you. But the reality is it's very expensive and time consuming. As in the case of USAID. So some judge says, oh, it was a mistake. It was wrong. It was bad. Shouldn't have done that. Well, you can't put Humpty back together again if the dirty deal has already been done. And that's the same with everybody. If your reputation has been tarnished, if you're out of a job, if some awful things have happened to you by virtue of this court battle, um, or you've lost contracts such as these law firms, you can't put it back together again. So my question to you is, what are your true rights? What do you as a victim, what can you avail yourself? Who will defend you? Who will pay for that? Are there counterclaims? Can you have a counterclaim against the United States for these things? You know, he's immune. Remember the Supreme Court's action in Trump versus the United States only last year. What can you do as a victim?
Well, that's becoming the $64 million question or $64 billion question, right? And because it's not a question of what can you do, it's a question of who is going to stand up to this. Are there lawyers who pro bono, without charge, will do that? The American Civil Liberties Union and others, Perkins Coie did it. They're now being attacked. There are others, Covington did it, they're being attacked. That's the reason for the attacks, is a bully will attempt to destroy the opposition in a divide and conquer way. And it's going to require the coalitions of what you've referred to as the victims, the objects of his attacks, are going to have to form coalitions in which there will be much greater strength because there will be much greater resources and more influence. If the battle is going on in social media, maybe some of it has to occur there. But the question is not what can be done, but who is going to stand up to do it.
Judges too, isn't he? He's talking about impeaching judges. I don't know how exactly that would work. I guess the procedure is the same as impeaching a president. You have to go to the House for articles of impeachment. You have to go to the Senate for a trial. And this really puts a dark cloud over any judge who wants to argue with him. I don't know where it stops. Where does it stop? You could have him fighting the whole country, the First Amendment, anybody who doesn't like him, anybody who represents anybody who doesn't like him. I mean, it's just on and on. Ben?
Just keep in mind, if I could say it like this, that nothing new under the sun, right? There was impeach or warn back in the day, way back in the 50s, if I remember right. But there were always minions totally willing to, file impeachment stuff in the House, knowing full well that you can't get 2/3 of the Senate, right? It's performative to intimidate judges, right? He talks about the other side. What is it called? Working the ref. He's working the ref. That's all this is working the ref to trying to get the maybe it's like the court packing plan of FDR in a different way, of working the ref to try to get the Supreme Court to allow his stuff. And I don't know. But the thing is that what I just would say is that, judges, federal judges are there for life. So that's a very, very deep aspect of who they are, that they have this for life. And there's really, you can do anything and say anything. They're still going to be there. They're still going to be there.
Unless you impeach them.
But you can't impeach them. You can never get 2/3 of the Senate. Yeah, even if you get the House to do articles of impeachment, they know the law that they can't get impeached because you're never going to get 2/3 of the Senate to vote to convict them. So, okay, you want to play that game, fine. But I'm still in my courtroom, and you still have to answer my questions, or I will hold you in contempt. The worry I have, though, is that if the court was to find a violation by the federal government to the extent that if you were an ordinary citizen, you would be subject to contempt, civil contempt, maybe, okay? I'm not convinced that judges are willing to hold the federal government in contempt. You understand? Two things come to mind. I don't know if you all remember the Native American Trust that was totally madly managed for 100 odd years by the Department of the Interior. There was no holding the government in contempt on it. Or when the CIA, there was an order to preserve evidence of the torture, and the CIA, a guy at the CIA, burned up some tapes. Clear violation of the order. What did the court say? It says it's a transgression. Don't do it again. That's about as far as the courts will go. So that's where there's, to me, little hope from the courts, because they're dealing with the government, and they will really hesitate to actually impose a remedy on the government.
They haven't done it. A number of courts in this country have said that he was ultra vires,
Right.
that he violated the law by doing this, that, and the other thing. But I don't remember any courts saying you're in contempt.
No.
Including the one with the El Salvador plane ride,
Right.
the oopsie case.
The oopsie case. Now, the only thing I would just say about that one is that you got Tom Homan saying, I'm not going to comply with the hell with courts, or something like that, right? I could see a judge wanting to call Tom Homan in and have him testify about all that. But that's it. I mean, it's not going to hold him in contempt. He's just
So
going to.
the last link on this chain is the Supreme Court. One of these days, the Supreme Courts will have to weigh in on a number of the issues raised. How confident are you?
I am not confident at all. But why? Because I think that John Roberts, if we've seen anything consistently between Bush and Obama when he's been on there, has always kind of had a little way, so to speak, out for the presidency, for the executive. He's always got, whatever the decision is, there's a little way out for the executive. He always leaves some space. Like he saved Obamacare kind of thing, even though there was an attack, that something was a tax and it hadn't gone through Congress. So, there's always like this little way out that he does. But could there be some things that are so egregious that he's going to vote the other way? Like he and Amy Cohen Barrett, 5-4s, I can see happening. I can definitely see those happen. But the other four, Gorsuch, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Thomas, they're gone. They will rubber stamp anything.
There was talk that two of the judges on the Supreme Court would not stand to see Sullivan versus the New York Times reversed, and therefore two of the right-wing judges on the court, I forget who it was. I think Amy Barrett was one of them, and Clarence Thomas was the other. And they had announced that they would not, or they had written that they would not reverse Sullivan versus the New York Times. But I saw recently that they may have changed their minds about that.
Sure.
If Sullivan versus the New York Times is reversed, Chuck, that is another arrow in the punitive quiver here. It means that the administration can put a given news media out of business by suing it for defamation until the cows come home for every real or perceived statement of defamation. Your thoughts?
They have. I'm sure they will again, and they can. But I don't think the question is whether judicial precedent as a protection of true First Amendment rights and 14th Amendment rights is our bulwark. It's the people. It's individual judges, including appellate court judges, federal appellate court judges, who are going to be the answer to that question. Are they going to stand up to this? I don't think we know that yet.
One thing that hasn't happened, or I haven't seen it anyway, is where the victim, to use that term, decides that his rights have been violated and he wants to do a counterclaim, or he wants to, start an action against somebody who is arguably not really a government official, like Elon Musk, for example. Does he have a cause of action? Can he join a party in some proceeding and say, no, 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 this person has violated my rights, due process, what have you? Now, Trump himself could probably trot out the, Trump versus United States immunity decision. But if somebody was arguably not a public official and was causing this action against the victim, would there be a counterclaim? Would the individual have any rights to go against those in the government who were depriving him of his constitutional rights, due process, First Amendment, and the like?
I would say the short answer to that would be probably no, because there is a long history of saying that the federal government operates through people. That's how it operates. So therefore, that immunity for the federal government, not just the presidential immunity, but for the government itself, attaches to the person who is operating within the confines of their quote unquote mission inside the federal government. And so while you have to sort of write these complaints against a particular person, like, A versus Hegseth or something like that, it's always, are they acting within the confines of their position? And there's a lot of deference given to that. Trust me, there's a lot of deference given to what is the breadth of that position. Is it a discretionary kind of decision that they're able to make, as opposed to a ministerial where they're just required to do it and they fail to do it? Those kind of things. And so you're just going to have a real problem with that. What could be interesting, though, would be, for example, Verizon was supposed to have a contract with the FAA to do something. But now Elon Musk is apparently moving his Starlink into there. Could Verizon sue Starlink, alleging, or, say it was Tesla, sue them for, interference with a contract or something like that? Those kind of civil things. That could be interesting, because that could be an interesting case. And there's the entities would have a lot of money. But if you're just talking about you or me, yeah, we're screwed. But don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Why should you worry about it? Why? I mean, let's say the shock troops come to my door today and they take me away, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to go away. I'd like to have a lawyer. I can't get a lawyer. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to do the case, and then I'll lose, and then I'll go to jail if it's a criminal case, and that'll, and that's it. That's nothing I can do about it. But I can still decide to say whatever I want to say, even though they will treat me like dirt. Just because they treat me like dirt doesn't mean that I think I'm dirt.
Well, the individual person on the street is not exempt. You're right. And the one thing that is very chilling is that Pam Bondi said she was going to go after the people just the United States, the Department of Justice. She was going to go after the people who were damaging Tesla cars and showrooms. How is that a federal issue? I'd like to know. But she was going to prosecute them on a federal basis. It's time for closing statements. And Chuck, let me ask you to start. Ben said that we're screwed. How do you feel about that?
The prevailing tide and direction at this point, the question is going to be, because our only survival is in our relationships, who are going to form the coalitions that enable us to survive this and turn it around? That's the critical question, I think.
I'm not encouraged. Ben, how do you feel about it? What are we going to do here? What's going to happen to us? Oh, my goodness.
Just because you're screwed doesn't mean that that's it, right? I mean, you these coalitions, writing letters, doing what you can in your place to the extent you can, knowing full well that at some point in time there may be some kind of retaliation. Yeah, but you either think that the American dream or the American way of life has some meaning that you have inculcated, right? And that you are going to be expressive of in some way. You either do that or you cower in your corner. So that's the choice that each one of us has to make. But I met James Meredith. James Meredith told me it wasn't only when he went to Japan that he realized that segregation was not ordained by God. I mean, that's the level he was at. Okay. That's how deep it was. And we're definitely not thinking, I mean, although Trump is trying to say he's been brought in by God, the divine wish and all that, we're not there. We're not at that level. We're not at that level. And the worry is, if I can finish this, is when people don't find the levers, or entities don't find the levers that they can use. I mean, Colombia just complies. All these entities that maybe have legal rules with good lawyers that could show this is what you could do. Instead, they just bend the knee, right? For whatever reason. Well, if you're going to be continuing to bend the knee, it's obedience in advance. And guess what? You're really going to be in a bad spot at some point in time. But if you don't push back, if you do push back, maybe you'll be in a bad spot. But when your grandchildren ask what you did during this time, you'll have this one little thing that you can say, which is, I did what I could. That's something in this life, because trust me, there have been occasions where the grandchildren have asked the grandparents, what did you do? And the only look on the grandparents' face was shame.
I would add only one more thought, and that is that the guys that set this up with that huge Project 2025 and all this, and the guys who are executing that project now are flooding the country with issues. They're flooding the country with punitive actions and retaliations. It's very hard to keep up. It's very hard for the practicing bar to keep up, for the ACLU, liberal lawyer establishment to keep up. It's very hard for the media to keep up. And that's one of the reasons why they're flooding it this way, I'm sure. So maybe it's a matter of catching up with that. Maybe it's a matter of establishing a resistance bar who will represent people, maybe pro bono, at every level of this punitive action and retaliation. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Ben Davis, co-host, and our esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this discussion. I'm Jay Fidell, host of American Issues Take One. We've been discussing confronting a punitive federal government. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.